change in the fundraising sector has never been greater. But innovations in technology are evolving faster than our ability to understand them. Are these advances good or bad? Do they have unintended consequences? And what is the application to the global fundraising sector? That's what we're here to find out. Welcome to the Fundraising AI Podcast, your up-to-date resource for responsible AI for the global fundraising community, hosted by Nathan Chappell and Scott Rosenkrantz.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nathan Chappell. I'm here on another episode of the Fundraising AI Podcast. I'm here with one of my favorite people in the entire world, and I don't say that lightly. This is a person that I don't know, from the moment we met, there was just like this instant connection. And even though we don't talk every day, she is always in my mind, and I'm always thinking the best things for her. And I know she is for me as well. I am honored to be here today with my good friend, Meena Das. Meena, it's so great to have you here.
The honor is all mine, Nathan. And you're right. You are always on a post-it note somewhere. I need to check in with Nathan. How is he doing and how is the work going? So I'm really, really grateful for having this conversation today.
It's so funny. We're both post-it note people because I texted you this picture that had sat on my desk, literally right here at my right hand, and it said, "Call Meena." And that's all it said on this post-it note for like 3 or 4 days. And then you texted me and I'm like, I have to show you this picture.
Yeah. I have post-it notes too.
Well, I also heard that you might have a post-it note of people that you don't like. And so I'm hoping I never cross over to that side.
Yeah, me too, for your benefit. Me too. I don't hope that's not a good part of my table. Yeah,
no,
but I do have post-it notes.
But it's funny because I think some of those people are we both have in common. So I think one thing that I really admire about you is that you just have a very high ethical, moral standard. And, there's a lot of things that you can do. And you're really good at setting boundaries and being willing and have the willpower to say no when something's not aligned with your values. And that's really refreshing. And I think gives people a lot of permission to kind of follow suit.
I appreciate that, especially with the conversations we like to have, because saying no or living up to your values, it's really a hard process. And it's a process, all right, because there are times when you don't know how to say no or what are the things that are at stake here and what's the long-term outcome of this or impact of. And there are just too many conversations and questions in the process before you say, okay, this is where I say no, or this is how I live my values. And this is no longer serves me or aligns with what I believe in. And so I think having those post-it notes on my table that these organizations or these people, good for them for having the values they live, but they don't align with what I believe in, is almost like a permission reminding myself today that as hard as it may be, I can live up to my values and up to my set of expectations and standards. So Thank you for saying that. It takes a lot of work.
And you do, and you're someone that is extremely well known to do that. And I really admire that. So we're going to talk about the AI Equity Project in a little bit, but I think for those that don't know you, which it's hard to imagine because you've been around and people tend to know you, you've got a great voice in the nonprofit sector. Could you share just a little bit about your background? I know it obviously, and it's super impressive, but just kind of provide a glimpse of kind of how you got into this place to even write or co-author a study or another study on AI equity. And then the other question I want you to follow up on that, because I've been asking this a lot at these dinners I've been hosting, is what is a piece of advice that you'd give to your younger self? So bring us up to speed first and then kind of end with that part.
Okay. I will probably start with the advice part, if that's okay.
Go for it. Yeah.
Okay, so obviously the answer to that question can change day to day, how I'm feeling. But in this moment of time, I think the advice I will give to my younger self is keep trying and keep showing up. There are going to be times when it feels like absolutely no point, ridiculous to be in the room with someone you don't align with, or conversations that feels like is going nowhere, but show up. Or times when it feels hard, show up. Most of these conversations that is about changing anything in the world is about showing up. And I have been in spaces and places and with my own emotional baggages where I felt like, what's the difference does it make if I don't show up in those places? And I have self-rejected myself from a lot of places and conversations. But now I'm at a place, and this is what I would have said to my younger self: if you see a table that is important to make a difference in the world and you don't see a chair for yourself, stand on the table, around the table.
On the table is even better. Yeah.
On the table, get on the table. If you see a chair for a friend of yours that you can't find, you can't bring your friend around the table, then create a chair, but be on the table that you think can make a difference. There is no self space for self-rejection. So if I go back to my story, I have worked in the tech space for almost like 17 years. I have spent a lot of time taking complex ideas and trying to find a way to measure them, to segment them. A lot of my life has been about taking these abstract ideas and thinking, how can I quantify this and how can I put it on a dashboard and how can I visualize it and how can I take it to someone who doesn't talk about this every day but make it part of their daily conversation. And about 4 years ago, I wanted to change this way of working, this design of my work. I wanted to do things with data where how I look and talk aligns with what I do. My values that I can articulate in a language can show up in how I work with AI and data. And so 4 years ago, I set up my company called Namaste Data. And now I proudly, joyfully use the words like data equity and AI equity. And this report that we are going to talk about, I think is coming from that advice, from the place that show up. So I kept showing up every single day around these topics. In every conversation, a blog. Nathan, you will write a blog post, I will get a notification, and I will read it in like 30 minutes and have thoughts about it. I love to show up in different places and spaces where these topics happen. And it helps me to take it back to my brain and process it and come back with ideas. So AI Equity Project, I think, came out on a weekend where I figured we don't have anything for our sector as a narrative. So it's probably coming from that same advice place that show up no matter how hard it is. All I need to do is show up. I don't have to do the best job. I don't have to be the brightest, shiniest star in a room or something. I just need to show up in a conversation. That's all it takes to create change.
Yeah, and you do that consistently, and it really shows in the community that you built and the followers that you've gained. You don't just show up, but you bring a lot of thought and contemplation and balance and wisdom to the sector and into those conversations. For those that aren't familiar with the term data equity and then AI equity, how would you frame that? So for the novice persons that just like, I'm just trying to show up for work every day and like somehow like I put data in, I don't know really it does. I get some of it out. Like, how would you describe data equity and AI equity and why it's important before we get into the study itself?
Okay, instead of giving a definition, how about I give an example that I start with in every workshop when I'm teaching data equity? So we have a grocery store here in Canada called Nesters. So any of the audience are hearing about Nesters? Okay. That's great. It's a great shot. The first time when I moved to Canada about 5 years ago, and I came across this grocery store, they had this little form on their table right when you enter into this shop. And I think we were in the height of the pandemic. Pandemic was just like 2 months right by that time. And there were these forms, which was, I think, from Whole Foods. They were doing some sort of research to figure out the shopping patterns of the purchasers and the people. And so this form had about 10 or 15 questions, I think I remember. What do you buy? How frequently do you visit the store? And how many people do you have in your family? Questions about your ethnicity, specific things that you like to buy on specific festivals, like these different questions, and nothing else. It was there. There was an open box that you had to like fill up and then drop in. And every workshop, when I start, I ask people, if you get into that grocery store, would you have filled out the form or not? Just for context, every time I went into the store, which was about like once every 2 or 3 days, I would see about 5 or 7 forms filled in, but not too many. The store was pretty packed. And I asked this question to everybody, and a few people raised their hands, a lot more shake their heads like, no, there's no context. And what is happening in that form is, this is how I want people to think about that form. That form is a window to the values of that organization. It's not just a 10, 15 questions that someone will take and then that box will get turned into an Excel spreadsheet and a visualization and a chart or something. That form is a window to how that organization thinks about data, how that organization thinks about the people who are filling out that form. These are some most personal questions. Which festivals you observe, and what food do you eat, and how many kids do you have, and what are your care responsibilities, without any context or care whatsoever of what happens to that data. So why should we trust an entirely nameless entity almost on a form to give our most personal information. This debacle, this struggle that people have, this can be translated into the concept of data equity. Data equity means creating that intersection of intentional design, the data that we have, and our identities in a way where we can put care and integrity at center, where we can showcase our values. That one form of 15 questions showed what Whole Foods believe in when it comes to this kind of research doing in a grocery store. So data equity can go in multiple directions, same as AI equity. It can go in multiple directions. The use, the analysis, how we do knowledge dissemination, how we include the community in these conversations. But the primary idea is making sure that we put care and integrity at the center of what we do with data and AI. That's how I would go with that example to explain how you think about data equity.
Yeah. So from that perspective, is the opposite then inequity? So like that in that setting, right? They are demonstrating their values in the form itself, but I worry about bias in the representation of such a small sample size that they might have of the total people that are willing to do it and what the bias might be of the demographic of the people filling out the form. And then also like them making decisions based on all people based on such a small sample size. So I go into complete like, oh, that data set's probably totally biased. And you're looking at it from a total design perspective. Like, what's the purpose of it from the very beginning?
I almost feel like we are not friends with data. To your point, I think we are not friends with our data. That's the first place we need to start with if we want to do and make any difference with data or AI. Is become friends with your data. Know who is in the data, how small is the population, what are the components that are small, what are the components that are large. The charts make it really beautiful to look at the things that are the brightest, biggest, largest. But what about the things that are small in smaller quantities as in comparison to the rest of the world? I mean, there we have too many things to put into text. The word context can hold more meaning than we are usually have privy to.
So I knew you probably before AI, not before AI was created. It's been around for a long time, but before we were working in AI, and you have really done a lot of work in data equity. Now moving into AI equity and a report that you just released, the AI Equity Project 2025, which is your second year, correct? The first one was last year. And I am super curious. So what was the origin story about AI Equity Project? And then let's get into, well, we're going to put a link in here to the entire report so people can download it. I'm just super curious as we get going, like what you thought it would be, perhaps, and maybe what it has become, and any just kind of big epiphanies before we kind of drill into like actual findings and things like that.
Okay, you really do like to ask complex questions and like 2 or 3 questions at once. Okay,
I'm not testing your ADHD. I'll remind you as we go along.
Okay, the story was that like 2 years ago, and you know this, you and I have had these conversations about AI. At some point, I wanted to find a state of the sector kind of place to talk about, like one single place where I can find the story of this sector, of where we are as organizations, as sector with AI, right? Back then, and I don't think there are too many reports yet, like from the nonprofits perspective. I do know about the donors that Chirian and you have done.
Yeah.
From nonprofits perspective, I only could find Google's study 2 years ago on Gen AI tools, and all they were asking was, "What tools are you using?" And that was pretty much it. And at Max, I had seen some reports that would go into asking questions about tech stack, but I couldn't see any report that was asking not just how do you feel about AI, but more importantly, where do you go for funding? Do you know the awareness, like testing on awareness? Do you know about AI? Do you know about AI versus AI ethics? Do you know about data equity? If you know it, do you put it into practice?
Right.
What is stopping you from putting things into practice? Because it's one thing to be aware of something, and it's another thing to put it into action.
Yeah.
What's stopping you from putting it into action? I ask questions like, who do you go to funding for? What do you do if you don't get funding for? Like all these questions that contribute to the story. And typically this takes, both the 2024 and 2025 report took about 9 months of work to produce the work, because it included a lot of interviews asking people about the harms they have faced and experienced with this technology. So 2 years ago, I couldn't find anything that went to this level of depth and care to produce this level of data. And so I started, I figured like you, if you see a problem and if you don't know how to solve it, then just take the step 1 and let's try to figure out to solve it. And so I started this project. The other reason, there was one more reason, and that was I have this little almost a little framework of assessment whether an organization is AI ready or not. And I'm probably talking a much simpler version of what I do. I call it the basics, mindset, and details framework, almost like a pyramid. So basics on the bottom, then mindset, and then details at the top. Details is where we talk about the tech stack, the applications, the login, the tech part of it. And I feel most of my conversations, at least, leading me to believe that most of us feel most comfortable talking about AI on that details part, like tech and tech stack and all of that. But then there's this layer of basics, and then there's this layer of mindset. Basics means, do we have a safe organization? If I bring ideas as as an ethnically diverse person in a team of, let's say, all white people, do I feel comfortable and safe in sharing my ideas? Mindset means, is my organization ready to unlearn a few things or create space for more conversation to learn a few things? And if we have those, I test on those things. If we have those, then we go and talk about tech stack and our understanding of data and what we have and what we are using to evaluate stuff. All of that is good things to talk about on details part, but the mindset and the basics is just as important. Now, when I designed this framework 2 years ago, I figured, honestly, I wanted an AI equity score, to be honest, but I don't think our sector is ready yet for any kind of scores, and we don't need to pursue a score. And that was another reason that if I was looking at this framework and I realized, okay, I want a study where we can, again, create that sector-wide narrative of who we are as nonprofits if we want to advocate for this sector. So that's kind of the origin story of where this is coming from.
Great. Yeah. It's awesome. And you're also, just a person who will see that opportunity. And it's a blessing and a curse for people like us, because the donor perception study that Cherry and I did is because we literally walking down the street in DC and we stopped and asked the question, like, well, who's asked the donors? And literally it caused me such a pause that I stopped walking in the middle of a street, stopped in the middle. And I was like, oh my gosh, I realized that we made so many assumptions about using AI, but no one paused to ask the donors. And so we just finished our 2-year study. And I agree, you just can't wait around for other people to do this. And so let's go into the study itself. It's pretty detailed. And when I say that, exhaustive, you don't do anything halfway. So this report is 114 pages, but it's written in a way where you can digest the key concepts very easily. There's lots of infographics. There's lots of call outs. So you can go through and be like, oh, yeah, this is really interesting. What is your number one objective in terms of the reader who reads this? What's your overarching desire for them to what do you want them to walk away with?
Well, the number one thing is, and this might be true, you might have thought about this too, Nathan, with your study, and you have done these kinds of work way, way more longer than these two studies. You don't want a good research report to just sit on the computer, or you don't want it to sit in mail or cloud and nothing happens with it. And there's a little shelf life. And then after that, you move on and people move on to that next big thing, which was one of the reasons that this report you will see has all these little icons and colors, what people can take away from the report, which, by the way, this wouldn't surprise you. I actually had two weeks of time off from doing the regular client stuff and everything, my speaking English, just to focus on writing this report.
Sure.
That was 2-3 weeks of deep into the analysis part of things. And so the first objective that I want people to take away from this is make this report accessible to yourself. I put in a lot of care. Michelle my co-founder, did a lot of effort and care to make this accessible for the readers. We divided it into pages. We made sure we gave some tips if using tools like ChatGPT to process this document. We have these icons and pages. But you are the best person to tell what can be made something more accessible. How can it be more accessible to you? You know your needs the best. And so the first objective I would say is, as you're skimming through the report, reading the report, if you see if there's something you can grab some slides and you can revisit them a few days later, or put it into a ChatGPT-like tool or Claude-like tool to process it, do that. Do what makes this most accessible to you, because we can come to what actions we should be taking out of a report as the second step. The first step is getting full awareness of this body of work so that we can create that engagement, and that can be led to an action. So I'm not even close to here are your 4 actions and go take those actions. make this report accessible to yourself. See how you can best engage with it deeper. That's how like tools like Netflix is built. Like it's not what movies will you like, Meena. It would be more like how can we most easily make it accessible, this tool for you, so you can design your own engagement on this tool. And then you can like your own movies, what you like.
And then hopefully share it with others around you. I mean, it's interesting with nonprofit AI, how many people have come up and they're like, hey, would you sign this book? I'm like, sure, but can you sign it to like our head of IT? It's so funny. It happens all the time. Like, there's somebody else I have in mind that because there's something I'm using and it feels like I'm very aligned with this work, but there's someone in my organization that is not aligned with this work. Can you share it with them? And so I'm guessing that's happening quite a bit now. I think empowering people to really understand the weight of what AI equity represents. And we can get into some of the concerns I have for the future based on AI systems that are designed today and whether or not they ever will serve humanity's greatest interest or promote human flourishing based on their actual functional design. But it is the AI that we have today. And in some ways, it is an equalizer for organizations that are resource strained and need to find ways to amplify their impact. It's a very powerful tool to do those things. While that's true, there are also some inherent flaws in the design of the tool and the future AI that will be created from the AI we're using today. That wasn't intended to be like 4 different questions there. We can definitely talk about that. And I know you and I can spend 4 hours over ice cream talking about, the end of humanity pretty easily with this. So the reader that's taking this on, they're going through, they're actually finding the things of like, just being reflective on their use of AI or not use of AI, and really hopefully at the end of the day, using it in a way that is more equitable.
I want people like, so, okay, objective 1, you made it accessible for yourself. You read through the report. My second objective is go have a conversation. Like all the things that spoke to you, or you felt like, okay, I don't agree, Meena, or with this report on page 26, 27, and 28. Good. Don't agree with the report. Challenge it, question it, find your questions why you don't agree with it, and then go have conversation with someone. So that I think is my second objective. Nathan, I see this. I don't know how you are seeing this or if you're seeing the same way. I see 2 groups of people when I speak about AI policy or anything to do with AI at a foundation or a mid-sized to large nonprofit. One, they send the staff members go to these different conferences where they have one-off AI webinars or topics or sessions, and they will hear AI can be meaningful, beneficial, effective, and all true and good things. They come back, they go and talk to this one IT manager or one data person or one prospect researcher, and then they say, here's what I need you to do, bring AI into the organization. And then there's this other group who comes back from these conferences and to their staff members. There are some staff members who just say, we won't use AI because of the environmental harms. It's AI is a thief and we don't want anything to do with it. And in between those 2 camps, nothing happens in terms of a team-wide collective conversation. And because of the lack of that conversation, ethical, transparent, simple, easy human conversation, collective conversation, that whole topic of AI sort of paralyzes almost to be brought more sustainably, to be brought more responsibly. It just comes down to, okay, this particular tool has some AI. Let's figure out what's the AI portion of that tool and let's use it for those 5 team members. But that's all it goes up to. And so I do think to bridge those 2 groups, my second objective is for people to have conversations. If you like some slides, if you question some slides, if you want to challenge some slides, take it, go to your team members and talk about it.
Yeah, I worry much more about the people related to AI in general that don't ask questions, right? I mean, if we have a technology that knows something about everything and can seemingly do anything, I mean, the person who doesn't have questions about that, I worry about a lot. Like we all should have an abundance of questions of like, is this right? Is it wrong? Is it good? Is it not good? Is it helpful in the short term, but not in the long term? All those things. Is it private, secure, ethical? All those things. So there are 2 areas I want to dive into in the report. The first is just that overall concept of like, I think I don't know if it's actually called that in the report, the great AI paradox, but it's the balance between hope and fear. And the balance between hope and fear, I see this all the time every day, even for myself, but those around me. And, this hope for this abundant future where AI makes everything better for everybody. I mean, to the ultimate extreme, to absolute, I mean, when I'm talking about extremes, to absolute fear of like, we're playing with a tiger cub that one day is going to realize that is much more powerful than we are. So in a very small micro way, that paradox of hope and fear, how are you seeing that play out from 2024 to 2025? Is it the same? Is the balance shifting a little bit, more hope and less fear, or is it just kind of still equal? Like, what was the result?
If I can pull two data points, like I do have like some data points in front of me. I have, let's see, I have the numbers version
Yeah.
as response, and then I have my feelings version as response
Okay.
coming out of all these conversations. So the number version for the response is that 50% said in the data, and I think there are like a couple of pages that talked about this. 50% said they fear AI could increase harm for the marginalized communities. It's pretty divided, and it's kind of similar between 2024 and 2025. So people are worried about the harms that can happen for the marginalized communities. But the interesting thing is only 15% have any AI guardrails or policy, any form of AI policy in the organization.
Right.
So 50% understand that it can create harm, but they don't know how to take any action for it. So they 50% is hopeful, 50% is how it feels like harmful, but they don't know how to take action. And so only 15% are taking any action to work on that fear. If that's a fear, well, how to tackle it?
What action would that be to address that fear?
Setting up some language as to how we will use AI. I have seen organizations saying, why do we need an AI policy when OpenAI is not willing to take accountability on their website? Why should we? And that's where we have to talk, like people who are interested in, like you and me, who are interested to talk about this topic with our sector, we have to share that we do need these AI policies because that's literally our values in language. AI is this kind of technology, which I'm going to take the example of kids. I don't have kids, but I'll take the example of kids. You're literally teaching the technology your values, right? You are teaching how in the future, if kill a bug or not kill a bug, how to determine what to kill, when or not to kill a bug. It comes down to how we raise our kids, our next generation. And so that's how this technology is. We need to be aware of who we are as humans, as individuals, as families, as organizations for our values. That needs to be written, documented somewhere, especially in companies and organizations, so that we can teach this technology how to determine what is the path right and what is the wrong path. And it's getting sophisticated. You are right. I mean, the bridge between that hope and fear, this is the other part of the response. We are getting to a place where this will be such a sophisticated, it is already a pretty sophisticated technology, but it will get to a sophisticated place of sophistication where it will be really interesting whether we are watching a bad horror Netflix movie or we are watching something that ends in a hopeful way.
The fear is that we won't know until after that happens. I mean, Chiri and Koshi and I have talked a lot about this idea. It's not the fact that AI can manipulate you, because it can, right? It's 87% more likely to convince you to take its point of view than a human. It's when it manipulates you and you don't know you're being manipulated. That's all the bigger fear of that kind of understanding. But I absolutely agree with this idea of like shoring up your use of AI to align with the values, your personal values as an individual, your values as an organization, to provide a grounding space to say and for me, that gives us permission to say no. And I think where the technology, to your point, will continue to grow and advance and do amazing things. Like absolutely, like it will seem like witchcraft in a few years of just like, how did it do this and read my mind and do these things? And the draw and the lure to do those things will be so powerful. The economics will be so powerful. Like, how do we give ourselves and our organizations permission to say no? And so I think to your point of really grounding yourself on those values is now more important than ever.
I almost saw one of the executive directors of an organization out of Seattle shared this week. They went to a AI conference, I think 2 weeks ago, and about 100 people were in the session. This was happening, I think, from one of the big tech companies on AI. And they were talking and they were part of this conversation or this conference. And they said there was a pretty starking difference in how people raised their hands as to this AI adoption piece. You could almost see all the people 50 plus wanted to use AI as soon as they could in the room. All the Gen Zers, early millennials, were immediately raised their hands and said, how could you? We need to talk about the environment harms and we can't do this. We shouldn't use AI. It's a thief. And And they said it was pretty interesting to see this two very basic difference. And just to add to that, my feelings to that conversation, if I pull myself away and think about that, you and I can do this dreaming conversation of humanity and long-term, what's the point of civil society and philanthropy intersecting with technology. I think we are not asking enough questions. If we want to save or protect humanity and us, we are not asking enough questions. Forget about the good questions. We are not asking enough questions collectively. We need more questions to be asked, and some of them absolutely should not be about how do I protect me as a human in this conversation. Like, I am comfortable saying the jobs Meena do, some of it will be done by AI, and that's okay. It's part of the technology process. We can do it with technology. That's fine. The bigger question for me is not to protect the human in this grand scheme of things, because Earth is not just about the humans. It's much more than that.
Sure.
How do we keep the humanity intact? How do we keep the good parts of us being us, about our empathy, our compassion, our kindness? How do we ensure that 50 years from now, 100 years from now, the technology we have, it will still keep these good parts of our humanity? We are not asking questions like those. All we ask is, will it take away things? Will it replace me? It may or may not. We can figure out and build a relationship with this technology in the next 5 years so that we can find new things to do. But I'm more concerned about what happens to our kindness in 50 years from now. What happens to our empathy in 100 years from now?
Yeah. What's interesting too, I think people should be aware of, is that the for-profit sector will act predictably, right? Because financial incentives will always dictate that. So we shouldn't be surprised when a for-profit entity is like, just use us no matter what, and we'll figure it out at the end. But the AI first movement right now really bothers me. So, and I have, good friends that do tons of training, like masterclass training, like Ali K. Miller does AI first mindset, AI first for organizations and people. And it sounds good, right? And it sounds like, yes, I should do that. But in reflecting on that and reflecting on our sector that operates in the currency of trust, and something that I, as in my role at Virtuous, is really making sure that our framing is human first, AI forward. So we can still be progressive, but what comes first, humanity or utility? And we always have to acknowledge, in our sector, I think we have to demand that humanity is greater than utility. And so I think, the AI mindset is a very powerful thing. Like, it becomes your primary orientation on how you do work. That's great. But making sure that humanity is always first. And so I don't feel like there's enough of those questions, and that fear of like the average person is just showing up. It's like, gosh, I have so much more work to do. I've got 300 emails and 80 Slack messages and all these things. And it just takes me all the effort just to get through the day. What shortcuts can I take? And then basically offload empathy and curiosity and critical thinking to a bot that at face value is actually pretty good at those things. And then we lose that kind of soul of humanity. And I know that we're going off of equity in some ways, but
can I just add one more point to that? I think a part of the reason to that is, and we are afraid of our failures. We are just afraid to fail. We are afraid to experiment. We are afraid to see things go wrong. And that is one of the reasons we need shortcuts to get through stuff. And this is pulling an example. I started doing long range biking in the last couple of days, and it was tough for me because this was a very new kind of bike. I had never used this before. And I was like struggling in the first 30, 60 seconds, 2 minutes. And I was almost willing to give up. Like, this is not for
the hard
me.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I figured, okay, let me give whole of myself into this and see how this goes. I might fall and I might break something, and that's okay. But let me get the whole of myself into this very new experiment I'm doing. I think I want to look for something like that from our sector, where we are willing to experiment a bit. And I know I'm probably asking a bit too much given where we are right now in the world with things, but I do want us to ask more questions. I do want us to lean in with trust and lean in with joy first approach in trying to figure out how to make sense of this technology. We can't have all perfect checklists and perfect masterclasses and perfect workshops to find answers to everything. Some of it just comes down to, who are we in this conversation? So you will find this interesting, Nathan. I have been trying to find answer to this with foundations and nonprofits by just focusing on accountability. So for all the things, even in the FAI principles, we have all these things that we have listed. I'm taking the word accountability And I am making these nonprofits think, okay, so if you want to use AI, here is your policy that you wrote, or we are drafting it now. Who is accountable? Where does AI sit? Does it sit with you as an individual? Does it sit within your team? Does it sit within as a centralized system? Does it sit as a hybrid model? And if we are building it, they are realizing those important long-range questions. Okay, we
Yeah,
can take the conversation in multiple directions.
I
I
know.
want to be mindful of the time
No,
that
no,
we
no.
are.
And if you still have a couple more minutes, I just want to I
Yeah.
want to round this out because I think, and when you're talking about the we, just making sure, like we're talking about the collective we, like we as a sector and also we as an individual have these
Right.
responsibilities. In the study, and I might be getting it framing wrong, but there was a number 65%. I think it was 65% of organizations are basically like curious about and or using AI. About 9% were
Yeah.
using it in any kind of strategic manner. And what
Yeah.
I thought was really interesting about there was a quote, or maybe it was just a sentiment, was like, it's not just a tech gap, it's a resource gap. Because then you get
Yeah.
into basically part of the challenge is that these organizations are resource constrained, right? As all nonprofits are by design, essentially, making a lot to do. And even though there's this awareness and desire to do better and to use this technology in an equitable way, there's this resource gap that is not essentially being funded. So I don't know if you wanted to talk about that, because I thought part of your call for attention, or not attention is the wrong word, but your call for action, that was better, was to like create awareness for funders as well, to say,
Yeah.
look, there's this like great opportunity that we can absolutely use to amplify impact in our organizations, but the resources don't exist to really support that yet. So I don't know if you had any thoughts or observations on that part.
Two thoughts on those. One, every organization struggles with what kind of budget do I need to place if I want to experiment with AI? Like, where do we have, what numbers do I have to place? So if you don't have any numbers, I have seen nonprofit basic $50 to each staff members. Let's try different tools. Here's
Mm-hmm.
our policy. Some basic language doesn't have to be fancy and sophisticated or anything, super sciencey. Just this is our language of policy. Use this, experiment using these $50, and let's come back and create this shared learning space. Just teach others what you have learned. Is this worth it? Can we use it? And they've seen organizations create beautiful trackers, very intentional trackers to experiment. And they started with $50 budget and they went up from there. What do we need? This is the tool where we can use. This is the policy. That's one way for the budgeting and the resourcing side of things. The other is, of course, you take external help from people outside to create that full budget if you're going all into an AI tool. The other thought that I have is I'm working with these two foundations, both one out of Chicago, one out of California. And these two foundations, both mid-size, they are learning AI with an investment of over 9 months for their staff members. One has 25 staff members. The other one has about 10, I think. I am one of their resident AI advisors for 9 months, and they are going all into learning different tools, doing workshopping, making sense of this AI equity project report. And they are taking all that and turning it into something that grantees can use. And I think that approach is so refreshing and different. How often do we see organizations wanting to go through the entire process and then showcase something for grantees? They didn't just sign up and say, here, Meena, can you do a workshop for our grantee nonprofits who are under-resourced? They are going through the entire process for themselves, and then they are simultaneously building a learning space for the grantees to come and invest their time into it. So I think it's a different thing that funders are doing, at least two funders are doing that I know of. So yes, we are under-resourced, but there are some creative ways we can work through that.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And honestly, for nonprofits that are reading this report, downloading it, to share it broadly with funders as well. Because number one thing that Cherian and I found was that 9 out of 10 donors felt like it was appropriate for nonprofits to use AI. But they also felt that the number one way was to help increase trust. And that was through like privacy and security. Like essentially, we want to trust you more. So use AI, but also disclose how you use that. And so being able to share that with funders, I think is huge. So this has been, I mean, Meena, you and I could go on, no joke, like for hours. Like this conversation, if we didn't have to stop recording, we'd go on for several hours and we'd cover so much ground and solve all the world's problems.
I believe you.
Well, we've done it before. And we're due for another one of those. So When I asked you earlier, what advice do you give to your younger self? As we kind of end this, I'm really curious. We think about a world 10 years from now where the pace of innovation continues to increase at this exponential rate. We're about to enter the information explosion, which is sometime 2027 to 2029 ish. AGI will be here before, probably not ASI, hopefully. But from 10 years from now, so 2035 self, your 2035 self, what advice would you give to your 2035 self? What advice would you give your 2025 self today?
Okay, you ask the hardest questions. All right, but I love your questions always. What advice I will give myself going to the future, to the
Yeah.
present, Meena?
Yeah.
Two things. One, change takes time. It feels hard some days. Honestly, it feels hard. Why isn't change fast enough? I like all these things that we are doing together individually. Why isn't creating that impact that I want to see sooner? Why isn't it here sooner? But change happens and it takes its own time. There are a lot of changes that happen on Earth if we talk from geography perspective. And each change happens in its own timeline. Flowers have their own timeline, rocks have their own line, clouds have their own timeline. But changes happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so changes that we want, it will happen. So believe in it. Don't give up. So that would probably one very fundamental, very basic advice I will give myself. And the other one would be just a reminder to myself that everything that we are doing, if it doesn't include the human dignity, the care, the integrity, I don't know why we should be doing what we should be doing. Just because we can, we should. That question bugs me. And so I do want to place everything, the human arc of our existence has to include, I don't see it any other way, it has to include this human dignity, this care, this empathy. And for that to happen, I need to remember that change is a slow process, but it is happening. We just have to show up, keep showing up.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think in giving yourself permission to say no as things progress and staying grounded by your values. I've been talking to people with like young kids lately, and I just spoke to a class at Notre Dame, freshmen. And, to be honest, it gives me a lot of hope that they're asking the tough questions and they're really, to be honest, more objective about the future than I think previous generations have been because they've seen the effect of social media. They didn't live through it as guinea pigs. And so I love that. I can always learn so much from you. I know everyone else can. We will put the link to the report and also a link to find you and also Michelle in the podcast show notes. I mean, this has been such a treat. Selfishly, I kicked Scott out of this podcast because it just to have one-on-one time and be able to spend some time with you is just a real joy for me. So, Meena, thanks for all you do for our sector, for those around you, for the community that you built, and just the care and love and wisdom that you just freely give everywhere you go.
Thank you so much for all this trust and love, Nathan. I always appreciate you. And Scott, will include him. We have to do like episode 2 or part 2 of this episode. I've been following this podcast for a very long time. Let's just take this offline. Why wasn't I before now? But really grateful that today I am. Thank you.
Next time we're at Starbucks, we're just going to hit record and and then people can listen in. Meena, what a treat. I will talk to you soon and keep on doing all the hard things.
Likewise. You too. Thanks, Nathan.